Thank you very much for giving that, if you like, perspective from a philosophical point of view, and being very clear about, where Maeve comes from in terms of her. I mean, obviously there are ranges of views and perspectives within the philosophy world, but she was very clear and straightforward about where the basis of her thinking. We have now some few minutes left before coffee and questions. Yeah, and maybe any of the three speakers can be in receipt of questions. Yeah, Ivana first.
Thank you, Ivana Bacik, and I was very struck by the three presentations and the very thoughtful perspectives that were offered, so thank you very much. I suppose the one theme that for me is emerging, or has emerged from my own thoughts on this, is that, the concerns we have, that you expressed just there, Maeve, in a philosophical way, about the causes of concern to believers, the causes of concern expressed by things like, for example, the Danish cartoons. Can those be tackled better through incitement to hatred provisions in statute, that rather than by any prohibition on blasphemy, either in constitution or in statute? Because I'm very troubled by the existence of blasphemy laws specifically, but I do see the need to ensure some sort of protection about religious sensibility. And I never alone have expressed that, but I personally think it could be done better through incitement to religious hatred legislation. I just wondered, do any of the panel have a particular view on that? Is that a more effective way of doing what we all want to do, without having to go into the morass of history and so on, and baggage that goes with a blasphemy offence?
Well, I think, thank you. I think this is a question for primarily for my legal colleagues. I know you have a great deal of legal expertise yourself. So I'm not speaking here, well, I'm not sure if I'm speaking as a philosopher or just a concerned citizen, but I would agree with you. It seems to me that there should be that the concerns one has with regard to blasphemy are better dealt with under the heading of offences against incitement to hatred. And I was struck by I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it was religious and racial hatred.
The racial and religious hatred.
Yeah.
Act,
So I mean, that would be the way I would want to go. But I'm not an expert on this at all. So maybe some of the others would have more to say.
I take the view that that doesn't work. The English Law Commission considered this in 1991-94 and came to the conclusion, I think in a consultation paper rather than a report, that there's just simply a difference between blasphemy and incitement to hatred. And Ivan, I'd rationalise it in two ways. First of all, I think that the current incitement to hatred legislation in Ireland is massively deficient in my view. So, but I'm taking your question as being not would the existing law cover it, but just generally would incitement to hatred. Yeah, I suppose that the reality of the situation, I think, is that the stuff which will really injure people's sensitivities will not necessarily incite other people to hate them, and that whereas there may be very good reasons not to have a law which protects religious sensitivities per se and only protects against incitement to religious hatred, I just don't think, and I've thought about this a lot, I just don't think that the two laws do the same thing. And therefore, I don't think that if you want to protect religious sensitivities from being significantly wounded, I don't think you're going to get there with incitement to hatred legislation. But that doesn't discount the kind of broader point, which is, well, if you have irreligious speech, if you will, which doesn't incite to hatred, should you go further and protect religious sensitivities? I suppose what I'm saying is I don't think they do the same thing, but it may well be that the argument is that it's only incitement to hatred that should be touched by the law.
I'll take one last question, if there is. Yeah, Brona, please.
Hi, Brona Farrell here. I was just wondering that if by taking the blasphemy section out of the Constitution, are you not effectively downgrading the importance of religion and religious sensitivities in our society at the moment, particularly in light of what's going on around the world. You know, you have the seditious bit in it, and that's more of a protection of the state, which is saying that the state was more important than people's religious sensitivities. And just to sort of paraphrase Jerry Durkin, who spoke at one of our conventions here about same-sex marriage, when I was suggesting about putting it into legislation, he was very adamant that if you just put it to the legislative side of things and not keep it in the Constitution, then any government who comes in has the power to change the legislation to suit any agenda, whereas if it's kept in the Constitution, that protection will be kept there, and that people would have to fight to have it changed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bruna.
If you think blasphemy is a very important social issue, a very important political issue, on which the Constitution ought to take a leadership position, then yes, you leave it there. So that's the second half of your question. The first half of your question, if it were to be removed, would it downgrade the importance of religion in the Constitution? The answer is no, because the Constitution is suffused with strong religious concerns all the way through, from the preamble all the way through. Michael McNamara referred to section 44. So there are lots of places where religion is protected and preserved and supported in the Constitution, apart at all from the blasphemy provision. So you can remove it and not really have an impact on the constitutional protections of religion. But if you choose to leave it there, you will be leaving it there for the strong social signals that you've just iterated. And then I suppose it's a question for the convention as to whether it wants to be left there for those social sorts of reasons.
I actually would take the opposite view. I'd actually agree with you, in fact. Sorry, I'd agree. I think if it had never been there, it might be one thing, but I think it would have, especially as it's generated controversy as the 2009 Act was passed, I think it would have a symbolic significance in terms of the respective balance between the individual and religion. In light of all that's happened, I think it would have a symbolic significance. When the 2009 Act was going through, it would have been possible for the government to have held a constitutional referendum to get rid of the crime of blasphemy in the Constitution, and to have tacked it on to another referendum. But the only other referendum that year was the rerun of the Nice Treaty. And I would be fairly sure the government, one of the reasons they didn't tack on a blasphemy thing was because when the referendum was being discussed, it looked like it was going to be close. It wasn't at the end, but it looked like it was going to be close. And there was a significant group that said, as it always does, that the European Union will sort of take our jobs and take our values and take our religion. And I think that one of the reasons why it would have been absolute madness to have held a blasphemy referendum on the same day as the Nice referendum is because I think people would have been even subconsciously alive to the notion of the symbolic shift if you removed a crime which had been there already. So I actually think that's a very good point.
Okay, we're going to bring things to a close. I really do want to thank our experts. I think they've served us very, very well this morning. And, you know, it's the beginning of what's going to be a very interesting day. So thank you to all, Neville, Owen and Maeve.